I need some traction. You need some traction.
Hey folks, Lloyd Lobo here, co-founder at Boast AI and Traction. Today's Traction webinar is brought to you by Boast AI Launch Academy in partnership with Growth Blazers. As you're tuning in, please introduce yourself. Tell us where you're joining from. I'm in Dubai currently till the end of the week. John, where are you tuning in from?
I'm dialing in from Burlingame, California, a little bit south of San Francisco, a little bit above Stanford.
Across the bridge from where I used to live for 10 years, and my wife still works at Stanford, actually. She teaches in the med school there.
Nice. Never went there, but heard great things.
Definitely free COVID test. If anyone is in the Bay Area, go to Stanford, the quickest free COVID test if you want. But excited for the topic today. The path to hypergrowth is built on the ability to navigate uncertainty while maintaining momentum. And John is here to share principles from complexity science. I don't even know what that is, to help you navigate extreme uncertainty and scale your company. So let's dive right in. We typically get a very international audience, folks tuning in from all over the world, from Germany to Calgary and so on. People are not as active right now, but we'll see as things progress here. But John, you're co-founder, CEO of SendBird, and quickly become the world's #1 chat API, 100 million monthly chat users across the world's leading companies, Reddit, Delivery Hero, Yahoo, Rakuten, Paytm. And you're a serial entrepreneur, engineer at heart, expert in the API economy, and you used to be Korea's #1 pro gamer for the Unreal tournament. How long have you been in California?
So I relocated back in early 2015, actually before getting to Y Combinator. And I guess it's a good 6-7 years now.
So you've had some really interesting career pivots, right? Software engineer, gamer, Y Combinator. Give us your backstory.
Yeah, where do I start? Geez. So I joined university as a double E, actually, not computer science, because I thought like when you get into electrical engineering, I thought you could like create electricity and solve humanity's problems. Apparently, double E is where you go to create microprocessors and memory. But anyway, I pivoted to computer science just because I like building software. So back then, right after university, I actually started my first startup way back in late 2007. Really great time to start a company, by the way, with the financial crisis, looming right around the corner. And the financial crisis is a pretty good, filter to see who's gonna like really, survive throughout that crisis, I guess. And so did my first company for about 4.5 years. We got fortunately been acquired by some other company in Japan, and then started this company with the buddies from my first startup. So we've been doing this for, I guess, 12, 13 years now. But initially, I loved engineering because it had one of the most direct feedback loops, right? When you build a code, ship a code, compile it, run it, you get immediate feedback, right? If you have a bug, you can also fix it. But as you kind of start to really build out a business, you kind of start to understand the different feedback loops. When you're doing sales or biz dev, the feedback loops get a lot like longer, more indirect. So you kind of understand like how to navigate different cycles of feedback loops, and then start to really understand how to create values and distribute, and et cetera. So I think you go from that, software engineers to business, really understanding how to create values at scale. So I guess that's kind of my career in a nutshell.
Definitely. So very interesting career. You could start a number of different things based on your background. Why SendBird? What made you start the company?
So I think historically, still to this date, most of my career was in consumer business, B2C. I was building like games, social games, and hardcore games, as well as like social networks, web services, Web 2.0. Nowadays, they're called Web 3, but back then it's like Web 2. So I was trying to build, or we were trying to build like a consumer application for social network for moms, basically, where you can either find other moms in your area with similar kids, find and use, or buy and sell, use baby products, and then set up play dates and etc. And we're trying to add a chat feature for our own application. This was like 2015, right? When everyone's talking about conversational UI, WhatsApp, Telegram, everything kind of took over the world. So we were trying to add a messaging feature. And at that point, we had like built chat like 4 times in our career because we were building gaming before. So at the our CTO back then was like, you know what, I built chat like 4 times. I'm not going to build it again. Let's just go out and like look for software. So we tried like pretty much all the open sources. Like we were on the buyer's journey, trying all the different SaaS vendors, and we couldn't really find the one that was like optimized for mobile experience that looked kind of had a modern experience. So we ended up scraping all the things we bought, and then we built it from ground up. And we're kind of like running out of money. Just like again back in 2015, before getting into YC, we were running out of money, and then we heard this thing called SaaS because we were on the buyer cycle. So we started selling on the side. We did a hackathon, pulled it out into SDK, started selling on the sideline, and because we've never done like B2B SaaS before, so we had this like random pricing point. So we had like $50 customer, $100 customer a month, and we had like 20 paying customers. We applied to Y Combinator with that idea, which ultimately become SendBird today. So fast forward 5-6 years, now we actually not 100 million users. Today we power over 250 million users, so 250 million on a monthly basis, and we power apps like DoorDash, Paytm, etc. So,
wow, what a fantastic journey here. And sort of you used other applications for chat, and you said I'll power the world with this. But there were some other tools at the time, right? Like Twilio and them, but they weren't serving the purpose, I guess you felt, in the mobile space.
Yeah, so one easy way to think about Twilio, by the way, we respect Twilio a lot because they really paved the way for a lot of API companies, or so-called API economy. I think an easy frameworks to think about is think about a mobile application. Pretty much like 95% what happens within the application, like we can handle that, right? But 95% what Twilio does happens outside of the application. Think about SMSs and emails you get, right? A lot of the things what they do happens outside the mobile application. So we have to deal a lot with the UI and the UX element, versus whereas Twilio does a lot of things with telcos, email, SMTP, things like that. So that's an easy way to kind of think about it. But back then we were clearly not the first one in the market. We had like other competitors like Layer. I think they won like TechCrunch Disrupt. They had a lot of spotlight. There were other vendors, but we ended up like starting from a kind of different vector. Like because we came from the gaming background, all we thought about like how do we get to scale, fitting as many people as possible into a single chat room, versus other competitors were like more focused on one-on-one conversations. So we architected quite differently from our other competitors, which really gave us a kind of a hedge or moat around how we kind of can build a really scalable business. And then over the years, a couple of our competitors like fell apart. We ended up like inheriting a lot of the customers from our other competitors, that we ultimately became kind of the leading vendor or leading platform in the market today.
What made you apply to Y Combinator? Because YC is a big ground, sort of breeding ground for some of the biggest unicorns like Airbnb and Dropbox and everything else. But you've seen some success. You're not a first-time entrepreneur. Why apply to YC?
Cause I was lonely. I got to Bay Area, didn't know anyone. Actually, it was our second time applying to YC. We applied to YC with the first idea, with the social graph or social network for moms. We didn't get in because it was like back then, like hindsight 2020, it's like so obvious because we were like 4 dudes from Korea who never raised kids. There were a couple of single folks in our team. We're trying to build a social network for moms in the United States who never raised kids in the US. We didn't grow up in the US, right? So I remember like PG, Paul Graham, like looking at Jessica, it's like, hey, would you use this app? And she's like shaking her head. I'm like, okay, this is how not to get in. But when we pivoted, it kind of made sense because we had built chat repeatedly. And then our partners back then was like Justin Kahn and Michael Seibel, current CEO of YC, and then both were like co-founders of Twitch. So obviously they knew quite a bit about chat. So it was almost like a product market fit. We had a partner startup fit. And then at that point, because we built like chat 4 times, we obviously knew about the problem they were trying to solve. And we were actually building a solution that we wanted to use ourselves. So it really got us, I guess, a nice win to get into YC. But ultimately, the key motivation was a couple of things, right? Because we were running out of money, we needed like a reason for us to continue to raise money, but also get some validation from outside of the company to see that what we're doing is actually makes sense and we're building something people want. We needed something to tell our investors like, hey, what we're doing actually makes sense. The pivot made sense, all the rationale we want to build. So applying to YC really gave us a conviction and the validation to our investors, like, hey, what we're doing actually, is gonna work out. So which ultimately did. So that was kind of like a morale, or I guess morale and a couple of rationale behind why we applied to YC.
So a massive pivot here, social network for moms, when none of you folks have kids or are moms, to the world's
a
number one.
Couple founders had young kids, but yeah.
To the world's number one chat API. Although a social network for moms could be really huge, but very capital intensive to build a social network probably in the 2015s, right? Yeah. How did you get your first customers? I'm curious, how did you find these people, convince them to use the product?
I think there's a couple of great essays on this, but basically it was a brute force. We tried pretty much everything under the hood because and they were done B2B. So how do I get customers? So obviously you ping your friends and in the networks or in the startups, like, hey, do you need something like that? And thankfully, back then the zeitgeist was around how do we add messaging feature for our own application? Because again, messaging app took over the world. So thankfully, a lot of these startup, or friends in the startup wanted to kind of implement chat for their own application. So we started selling to friends, and then also did a ton of outbounds. We got banned by or blocked by Google. G Suite was keep banning our own accounts because I was sending out too many outbound emails. I'm not too proud, but I don't think I spammed YC Network, but I did a lot of personalized email to YC Networks back then. Back then, the batches were still small enough. It wasn't 300-400. It was 80 to 100. So I was pinging a lot of YC founders, and then just cold calling. Well, not technically calling, but cold emailing to a lot of folks. And then because we didn't have money, ultimately what ended up working out really well was SEO and content. So a lot of other founders and the early employees, we took turns writing blog content and did a ton of SEO because there was we couldn't pay for paid advertising, which really helped us for the inbound kind of engine to work for many years to come. So I think ultimately a little bit of a combination of outbound and then a ton of inbound.
So early days, do things that don't scale. Outbound's actually a great way because it's predictable, right? You reach out to a number of people, a portion of them convert, etc., and then content in the long term. At what point did you know that this is going to be a company? You have product market fit.
So there are a couple of things, right? One, we started getting customers that we did not deserve. Because we were when we started working with Reddit has been our wonderful customer for many, many years. I think we were maybe 20, 30 people back then. So right before Series A, even we were C stage. And Reddit back then had already more than 100 million users on a monthly basis. So we clearly did not deserve Reddit or pretty much any unicorn for that matter. But we started getting these inbound, or Reddit was more than outbound people. We started getting inbound from a lot of these massive companies who had millions and millions of users. And back then our goal was how do we get to a million users? And it felt like a goal that was, impossible, but we started getting ping from these consumer application that had millions and tens of millions of users. So one, we knew the market was pulling us. And two, because we're, trying to price things and et cetera, we started getting this customer who instantly doubled our revenue. We had many instances where a customer came by and we had a pricing calculator. We built it because as an engineer, that's what you want to build. So we started putting these metrics and whatever numbers customers were quoting us, they put it in, and the pricing calculator gave us 6-figure, ACV. And back then we never sold software for 6 figures, right? So we kind of, I was very, very nervous when I was quoting this price to a customer. It's hey, please don't get sticker shock, etc. I know we still have room for negotiations. I spent 5 minutes to make sure that customer was not surprised with the number. So it's it's gonna be $400,000, and they're yeah, sounds reasonable. I'm what, really? Just like that? So we instantly double our revenue, etc. So when you start getting pulled by this customer you didn't deserve, and you start doubling your revenue because of certain large customer, you kind of okay, maybe the market needs us. We need to exist.
Definitely, the pull is one great, fantastic indicator where you're not forcing people to buy, but you have to also learn to sell, it seems in a way, coming from a sort of consumer background to B2B SaaS. What were some things you learned along the way to help you sell better?
Yeah. So I still hop on a call with customers a lot, and as the YC mantra goes, you build product and talk to customers, right? That's only two things that really, really matter, other than hiring, recruiting, of course. I never really thought of it as a selling. As an engineer, you like to problem solve, and when I hear customers' problems, like I want to solve them, regardless of like what it is about, right? Whether it be infrastructure, that you start recommending like different solutions, and part of the solution was like chat. So in the early days, when I was like having this conversation, obviously our buyers like engineering, VP of engineering, CTOs, and like product, product managers. So like I get so excited. I'm like, okay, these are all like three different problems you're working on. Here, let me refer you to this like different software that's out there that's probably helpful to you. And then a couple of customers like, hey, like you're like all the other vendors we talk to, they're trying to sell everything they can possibly sell, but you're like genuinely trying to like help me solve my problem. I'm like, I guess so. And that's how we kind of like earn the trust of our partners. And still to this day, like again, most of our earliest customers are still with us because I guess we've been kind of building a trust and being able to be helpful to solving their problems. And yeah, I think that's kind of like how I saw myself was like, how do I make our customers' life easier by solving their problems? And then also like, get paid along the way. And then you start to like learn about different like, sales books like Predictable Revenue, Sales Acceleration Formula, Challenger Sales. You start to read these books. I'm like, then it all starts to make sense. What am I doing? What I have been doing was basically selling. But I think we're still to this day, I think we're looking the right way is to solve customers' problems.
Definitely. And one interesting thing is you, I guess, coming from an engineering background, you're not the heavy-handed salesperson. You're consultative. You're trying to solve their problems. And if the buyer on the other end is like you, an engineer or a technical buyer, then their guard is automatically down, and you build that instant trust, right?
Yeah, I do think there's a benefit of because we're an API company, or used to be. Now we're a platform company, but I do think there's a level of trust or empathy you get from customers, like because we've been in the shoes and we used to be the buyer. Like we want to find a solution that we want to buy. So I think that certainly helps.
Definitely. Did you have some milestones in those early days where it was like go, no go? Because you had the social network for moms that you pivoted into or changed direction into SendBird. But at SendBird, did you have sort of a go, no go time frame where you said, hey, if this doesn't hit X, Y, Z, I'm going to move on to the next thing?
Yeah. A lot of people think like pivot is like one day you just wake up, you talk to founders like, oh, we should do something else because this is not working. It wasn't like that. It was actually like a 6 months long kind of a gradual transition, because ultimately it comes down to one critical lesson that I learned from my first startup was like expectation management of your employees, customers, users, investors. You want to make sure that like nobody's ever surprised. So to your point, you have to set certain like milestone. Like if we evaluate this, they make sense to go to the next level. So we pivoted, ultimately decided to fully pivot in 2015 May. That's when we like did a soft launch, private beta, private alpha, basically. But the actual pivot started around like November or December of the previous year, 2014. So we had like a couple of months. It's like, can we actually validate this idea? Will somebody use us even before we build our product? Will people want to like sign up or give us like a deal or sign a contract? And two was, can we actually generate revenue early on? So one of the things I was talking to my friend who was running like a channel, or I guess a mobile analytics platform these days, but back then he was doing a whole bunch of things for other developers. So it's like an agency kind of thing. So we asked him and he was like, yeah, a lot of our customers need this. So I'm like, well, then what does it mean for you? And he actually offered, if we get an exclusive deal to distribute a product in Korean market, we'll pay you. I'm like, how much? Because I need some level of dollar to go back to our investors and tell them, it's like, hey, we have this like kind of early traction. There's a signal in the market. So we need to invest more resources here. So he actually offered to pay us $100,000, which was like, we had zero revenue for 3 years with our mom's app. So and somebody like dangles like $100,000 in front of your eyes. I'm like, holy cow, this is it. So, right. Nowadays, like, okay, 100,000 is nice. But, back then it was the most amount of money you've ever seen in your life as a business. So, so we kind of used that. So we had to like validate, is there revenue? Is there customer early traction? Are there like feedback loops that we can build with customers, etc.? And then so we carefully manage to communicate with our investors, say, hey, there's a little bit of early signal here. We're not quite sure yet. We're still going to run the main business, but here are the things we're going to test. If we hit this milestone, we'll let you know. So we've been kind of like communicating that on a monthly basis. And I think around May, that's when we actually got the revenue. We actually start getting our first real paying customers in production. We're like, okay, this is it. Like we have to pivot because 1, we're running out of money, but 2, we had like real customer demand. 3, we had revenue. So we start getting traffic and users. So I think that's kind of like how we manage the process. So it took us a good six months.
Definitely. Now, you said one thing that's interesting. We're no longer an API company or a platform company. At what point do you decide to become a platform company in a journey as a founder? And what does that mean for SendBird?
So, I mean, for pretty much all the B2B businesses, you start as a feature company, then you become a product company, and you become a solutions company, right? So when we started out, we were like a chat API, essential, very minimal chat API company. Then we started building all these like moderation capabilities, analytics, and we kind of became a product company. Then we launched like voice calling, video calling. Now we have like solution per vertical. We have content. We can educate the customers, coach them, like really help them become successful. Now we are becoming more of a solutions company. And then now, I guess this year we're starting to elevate. We used to focus on user-to-user communication. Now we're also helping out with the brand-to-user communication capabilities. We also not only work with like the tech innovators and early adopters, but we also start to penetrate the enterprise market and traditional businesses. We're trying to become more, I guess, digitally transforming. So we're trying to now tackle the mainstream market with our holistic approach of providing a solution and the platform. And then we're no longer as a single kind of siloed product, but we also integrate with different like CRMs and different analytics. They might use different marketing campaign solutions. So we now plug into existing ecosystem of software that our customers tend to use. So we're now really becoming the platform company where people can plug in different software to really aggregate all the communication or conversation that's happening on their business. So you start to elevate that, but you do not want to go all the way there from the beginning. You want to start with a very concrete value proposition. Because this was the interview that I had with YC when we were applying. It's like, oh, we're a real-time communication solution. Michael Sai was like, no, you're not. I'm like, what do you mean? Like, it's like, so what do people search on Google? We're like, well, I guess like chat SDK, chat API. And Michael's like, you're a chat API company. Like, no, but we're more than that. It's like, no, trust me, you're a chat API company. So we ended up like switching all of our content and marketing messages to like chat API. That's how we build our internal or inbound engine. But over time, we kind of were able to elevate our value proposition to our level. But if we started there, I don't think we built the inbound engine that we have today.
Definitely. I mean, you can build a pretty big company, at least 10, 15 million in revenue, serving one kind of customer, offering one kind of thing. I think the focus is really important in the early days. But, as a founder, how do you sort of decide when is the right time to add additional products? When is the right time to become a solution? When is the right time to become a platform company? Because you said it, right? You don't want to start there on day one, but what day is it? Like, how do you make that judgment?
I think there are a couple of like thresholds or milestones they can pick, whether it be ARR, type of customers you talk to. Some customers have, startups have to, mature a little bit earlier. If you're targeting like traditional enterprises, you probably have to go up the market a little bit faster. But you can also build a fantastic business targeting SMBs and mid-market, et cetera. So it really depends on the business you're trying to build. I guess in our case, there are a couple of things. One was like ARR threshold. 2 was like, again, type of customer we were trying to sell to. Like I said, like digital native business. Now we're targeting digital transforming businesses. And then they also, from the inbound or outbound self-service versus self-led. So you have to have this like couple of different like vectors in terms of like how you measure the DNA of your business or core of your business. So I think that's kind of the factors we consider. But yeah, I don't like cop out, but I do think it really depends on the type of business you're trying to build.
Definitely. Now I want to dive into these 4 techniques we had discussed for the session today. You talk about complexity science, abstraction layers, human capital framework, and then building emotional capital and cognitive empathy. Let's dive into each one of them with probably some concrete examples here. What is complexity science and principles of convergence and divergence? And How should founders think about applying them to their business, their life?
Oh man, this is a loaded question. So maybe some folks in the audience may know, but complexity science, you can think of it as like I guess simpler version would be like network science or mix of network science and chaos theory, basically. But like it's the element of how the nodes and the edges of or networks interact with each other to create this like emergent phenomena. So a good example would be like our consciousness, right? How does each neurons do not have consciousness, right? But when they start interacting with each other, you have this like mind and consciousness. Same thing with like organizations. You think organization is just a collection of people, but when people start to interact, you have this culture, you have this like value proposition. So a combination of people can do much greater things than individuals, right? So I think complex science is really understanding the interaction of each nodes and then the network and the value that it creates. So I think using that as a framework, I guess two kind of a management framework that I use when I try to make decisions or when to decide when to pivot or continue to double down on the business is really two different vectors. One is convergence versus divergence, which goes in the x-axis, and the abstraction layer, right? Do you go up the abstraction layer or go down the abstraction layer to more concreteness or towards the abstraction? So convergence and divergence, I think one easy way to think about it is like convergence is like really doubling down. How do you continue to force the company to really narrow your focus and then get better at doing things versus divergence, like, okay, this is not working out, we want to diverge. So I don't know if it helps, but let me actually share one quick image. This is like a good visual representation in optimization theory or pretty much anything in life, right? Think of yourself as a person who landed on this landscape. Now you want to figure out, and you're blindfolded. You don't know where you're headed. You don't know where the highest peak is. You're trying to get to the global maximum, the highest point in the mountain. But because you're blindfolded, all you know is that you can move around and you can figure out, hey, am I going up or down? So if you take a wrong step, you might actually start falling down the hill or to the valley. Or sometimes you feel like you're going up the hill. So you want to get to the highest peak. But because you're blindfolded, you have no idea whether you are at the highest peak or you're one of those like local maximum, one of the local optimums. So then you have to figure out, am I stuck in a local optimum? Then how do I get out of it? So convergence is, think of yourself as like, I want to go up, I want to go up. Then you're going up. That's a convergence. Divergence, like, hey, it's okay to go down, but I think I can bet or I have a belief that might be a bigger hill out there somewhere. So a divergence, like it's okay to go down. It's okay to lower your AR. It's okay to pivot. That's a divergence. Whereas a convergence, like, you know what, this isn't working. Let's go up. Let's just continue to focus on AR or some metric that you're measuring yourself against. So I think this is true in life, whether it be building a company, figuring out your optimal career point, pretty much anything. So I kind of use this as a kind of a framework to make decisions and decide when to pivot or continue to double down.
Definitely. Now, this is really interesting, right? So how do you know you don't have like a sort of false positive or you're hitting a local maximum? How do you leverage this to get out of that mindset of, hey, you know what, I may have hit a local maximum, but you don't know.
Yeah, the beautiful thing about life is like, quote from the Forrest Gump, right? Life is like a box of chocolate. You never know what you're going to get. You gotta really go for it. And I learned this while I was doing a professional gaming too. When you're like in a professional gaming or pretty much any like professional like sports, right? You're in a competitive sports. You get to this like point where you feel like your skills are stuck. You can't really beat this next opponent. You've hit a slump. There's a plateau in your skill, and you just have to like figure out how do you break your bad habits. You got to like reconfigure your habits and really like elevate yourself to get yourself unstuck from that moment, and then you start to grow again. So you have to go through these multiple cycles of like getting stuck and getting yourself out of local optima to be able to compete at a global level. So again, it's like unlearning a lot of your bad habits or old habits and relearning new things. So it's pretty much the same thing with business. When you start to measure a couple of key growth metrics, but whatever you do, whether it be channels, marketing, sales, whatever you do, you feel like your growth has such a slow down that like you're getting very, very close to local maximum. And because you're not a multiple $1 billion company or multiple $1 billion of revenue, market's pretty big out there. Whatever you do, market's going to be pretty big. How niche of a business you run. So if your growth rates start to slow down, then they're getting very close to local maximum. Then you have to figure out how to get myself unstuck. Is it a new channel? Is it a new product? New leadership? So that's kind of how you start to measure yourself as like, whatever you do, your growth rates start to kind of stall.
The two very important things you say. Market is pretty big, no matter what you do, or in many cases, at least if you're in a venture-backed startup world. And then the second thing is when you start hitting plateaus. Christian asks here, what metrics do you use to determine to go up or down?
Yeah. Ultimately, the best metrics, like whatever the customer find value in you, right? Let's say if your customer think number of users is the most important value that they're going to measure, you should measure yourself against that. If you're in a data cloud storage or data analytics, like how many megabytes or gigabytes or data you process, or how many rows of database you're processing. So think through the lens of the customer's value. What is the value that they're measuring yourself? And then how they decide to buy from you or not is ultimately the value that you're creating. So measure yourself against that. So we, internally, we track a couple of different metrics that we think is a good validation of creating customer value. We measure things like daily engaged users. How many people are not just like connecting to chat or connecting to our platform, but actually exchanging messages or actively reading messages or sending messages, right? Things like that. Or from business perspective, we also measure things like, ARR, gross dollar retention. So a couple of, SaaS metrics plus whatever the product usage, metric that you're trying to measure, and see if you can continue to grow that or not. And again, like I remember, I think Twilio, I met with a lot of Twilio's investors. And Twilio, I think initially their Series A deck, something like their market size was like 200 million or 400 million. Obviously, they're doing much, much bigger now in terms of pure revenue. But their entire market size for CPaaS back then was assumed to be hundreds of millions of dollars. Obviously, that turned out to be quite false. Market was a lot greater than that. So I think that's what I'm saying. Is like market's usually bigger than what you assume. Is even the investors underestimate your market size. Even the founders underestimate your market size. So have a belief that there's a lot of people out there that are willing to buy whatever you're building. So yeah, keep on focusing the North Star metric that customer value the most.
Definitely, and Twilio today is like over 30 billion market cap. So definitely that's great advice here. I'm having a hard time framing or understanding the concept of abstraction layers and how you've used it to fit into this concept of convergence and divergence.
Yeah. So convergence, divergence is like, again, the x-axis. Abstraction, navigating abstraction layer is like the y-axis. So one of the most important thing in a hyper-growth startup is like, can you move between the different abstraction layers? To give you an example, right? In the early days of founder CEO, you got to kind of do everything. I still remember the days when I was ordering stuff on Amazon. Hey, we need more power cords. We need to order this monitor. And we're debating, is it going to be 24-inch, 27-inch, and 27-inch is more expensive? What hertz, what refresh rate you want to get. So you're like really at the ground level, at the concrete level. And then once you start to build with people, let's say 20 people, 50 people, etc., you have to move up the abstraction layer. Otherwise, you have no leverage in terms of like scaling your business. And also, especially people who tend to be great IC, individual contributors, have most difficulty going up the abstraction layer because they know how to get shit done. They know how to do the work in the right way. So they kind of like want to still manage in the gory details, which sometimes doesn't really, really work out when the company's growing really, really quickly. So you need to figure out, how do I remove myself and go one abstraction layer? So you're no longer directly doing the work, but you're working through people and systems. And that can be quite hard because, again, you're removing yourself from the feedback loop. Before, whenever you did X, you get immediate feedback of Y. But now you're like kind of doing X, asking people to do X, and then you have to wait a couple of days and then maybe a week or a couple of months to get a feedback. It's like, oh, it's kind of like worked out, and you have no connection with the direct feedback loop, right? So that's like when I'm talking about abstraction. Are you okay with that? Some people are not okay with it. Some people love going from 0 to 1. Whereas some people like going from 1 to 10 or 10 to 100. So it's like navigating the abstraction layer. So once you have like the managers, then you'll end up hiring like directors, VPs. Now you have like multiple layers, abstraction layers. It's gonna take a ridiculously long period of time. And whatever you do, it's gonna get diluted along the way. So you have to work through the influence and the layers of people to get something done. And so you have to now build the systems and culture to make sure that things go in the right direction, but you're not actually doing the actual like direct work. So that's what I mean by navigating through abstraction layers.
Definitely, going from an individual contributor when you're a founder, sending everything from email to ordering coffee, to then becoming a manager and then having to level up to an executive is very hard. And not a lot of companies can make that journey. What are some things you've done or things you've learned along the way to make that journey successful? So you're fine with it. That's something, the company is on mission and on values, moving towards a goal without me in the room. And things are happening and you're comfortable with that feedback loop taking a long time. What are some ways to make that or bridge that gap or make that journey to executive?
Yeah, I think there are a couple of things that you can use, right? One is ultimately it comes down to people, because the only real leverage you have as a leader or a manager is like through people. Because like, again, you have to navigate the abstraction layers, and the only way to really navigate the right abstraction layer, think about our own business, right? We're an API company. And if our API is not doing our job, our customers are going to come in and start talking about the features we have to implement and start asking if there's like what's the root cause of this like outage, or they'll try to like really understand our code. And that means we're failing as a business, as an API business. If you do our job right, then customer only have to care about the documentation and the API calls they make and the results they get. Because like they can go to sleep at night without having to worry about what's underneath the hood. That means we're doing our job right. So also when you hire the right people, you can kind of like really delegate and believe in these people, because they'll get the job done. And the only things when they really get out of hand, they escalate to your, I guess, abstraction layer. But pretty much all the other like P2, P1, P2, P3 problems, they'll solve it. Only becomes like P0, then they'll escalate towards your way. So you're also looking to hire the right people who can also become like an API within your own companies. So I think an easy framework was used by Frank Slootman, like the CEO of Snowflake. It's like, are you hiring drivers or passengers? What I look for in I guess the right leaders, at least at director levels and up, is we look for drivers who can be proactive, who can figure out problems, identify problems before even they happen. And when the problems do happen, they can problem solve kind of autonomously. So we are looking for those drivers. Whereas in the IC level, you still want to give them, coach them so that you can kind of distill who is the driver or passenger. And you also do need passenger along the way, but at least on the leadership level, you want to find the drivers so you can kind of continue to increase the leverage of your organization.
Definitely. That's a great way to look at it, drivers versus passengers. But you need both, right? And you're saying at the leadership level, you're looking for drivers. Any sort of mistakes to watch out for that you may have learned the hard way when you're making this journey?
There are a ton. Never compromise on your core values, because core values are a very, very useful tool. Because if you don't have a core values in your organization, what ends up happening with is people fight over different personal values. Some people may like, hey, I believe in working 100 hours a week. Some people almost like, no, you only need to work 40 hours a week and you got to have work-life balance, etc. Those values will never converge because it really is yourself. You're being authentic to yourself. But by having core values, you can kind of align everyone to that value. Because when you hire people, you're looking for those alignment to your values. When people join, they're agreeing to the values. They're subscribing to the core values that you have. So by using those core values, you can start like really aligning the leadership, and then also help people run autonomously. They can make decisions as long as they're aligned to the core values. They can make the decisions and then really execute without all this like micromanaging, etc. So having a core values is like super helpful when in terms of recruiting, scaling up your team, and then letting the organization run, I guess, autonomously.
Definitely. I think autonomy is one of the key things that people crave, right? You don't want to bring on people and then micromanage them and tell them what to do. But what is the one thing you've learned that's been very helpful in creating autonomy for your team?
Yeah, I think there's a good book out there written by Daniel Pink, a book called Drive. It talks about intrinsic motivation. And I think the three factors there in the book is called, AMP, like autonomy, mastery, and purpose. So you want to give purpose to people that everyone's part of is something bigger than themselves. Mastery so that people can also grow. And then autonomy is like you want to delegate and give empower people so they can make decisions on themselves. And then there's a fourth dimension that's not mentioned in that book called relatedness. So I think the acronym is like RAMP now, RAMP. So you want to also become part of the community and part of the organization that you can like really feel, as part of the community. So you want to kind of like make sure that when you're quote unquote, managing people, or if you're seeing people are being demotivated, you want to figure out like out of these like 4 columns, which needs are not being met. Sometimes people kind of tap out, not because they lack autonomy, but because they've tapped out in terms of mastery. They've been doing this for many, many years. They're not learning anything new. So when people are like about to leave, usually it's a sign that maybe 2 to 3 out of those columns are starting to like not really work out for them. So as a manager, you want to be very cognizant of out of those 4 columns, which one are you speaking to? So once people have intrinsic motivation, extrinsic motivation are like followers, salaries, your title. Intrinsic motivation is like what matters to you, right? So as a manager, once you give people, or once you set up an environment where people can find intrinsic motivation through those like RAMP, then people can pretty much operate autonomously. That's when you really need to like kind of back out. It's like, hey, here's our goal. Here's why you're doing it. You kind of figure it out. People can then operate autonomously.
Definitely. No, that's great advice here. Tell us more about the human capital framework that you've leveraged in your business, in your career, your life.
Yeah, I think I also made the same mistake early in my career. So to explain a little bit about what human capital means, there are 3 pillars in human capital. 1 is intellectual capital, 2 is social capital, 3 is emotional capital. I won't bore you with the details on what it means academically. But basically, initially, when people are just starting out their career, people obsess over intellectual capital. Intellectual capital means what you know, your knowledge and experience, versus social capital is like who knows you, not like who you know, but like who knows you in what way. So it's your leadership, your basically influence and like reputation of the people you work with, and I guess probably the market. And emotional capital is like how you motivate people, what motivates you. So being able to be like really manage yourself, mind from the I guess mental health perspective, but also like be able to motivate others and also take action when needed versus like just like studying academically. So it's really balancing it out. But the common mistake is like the more junior you are, people I guess optimize towards intellectual capital. But ultimately, what becomes even more important throughout your career is the social capital and emotional capital, because rarely you see people really understanding how to accumulate your emotional capital and also social capital too. Because when people like jump ship every 1 to 2 years, what they're optimizing towards like fancy resume, great titles, more salaries. But what they don't recognize is like they're sometimes letting go of the social capital, before they actually accumulate. Because if you think through the lens of an investor or any executive hiring a VP at a company, you obviously go do the reference checks, right? Back channeling, everything. That's like a very, very standard practice. What has that person done in their previous job? What kind of achievements have they done? What are the things that they actually initiated and carry all the way through? And for the people that they can bring along, let's say you hire a VP of sales. Obviously, you're not just hiring that single individual. You expect that person to bring on regional directors, all the ICs of sales reps, customer success people, who are the people that are going to trust this person enough to join this company, right? This is you're hiring for the social capital. But if you, let's say, jump ship too often, you're not really, gaining any social capital. So what I generally recommend to people early in their career is like, not only think about intellectual capital, which obviously will come from time and effort, all those things, but also make sure that you're accumulating enough social capital as well as emotional capital.
Definitely. Now, let's dive into emotional capital, cognitive empathy, and the trade-offs of agreeableness. What is that? How have you used it in your company? How should we think about it?
Yeah, there's a good personality assessment framework called Big 5 Factor Model or OCEAN model. Basically, it's like openness, agreeableness, conscientiousness, etc. So people should look it up. But it's more reliable and has a high ability as a model than, let's say, Myers-Briggs, MBTI, or Enneagram. Basically, one of the factors is called agreeableness, basically how agreeable a person is. Now, you think a disagreeable person is bad, but actually it's like agreeableness is negatively correlated to social economical outcomes. So people who have low agreeableness tend to become leaders, and not always, because other factors matter too. But like they tend to be a little bit more independent thinking. But the downside of that, and I faced this challenge myself, was like there are two different kind of empathy. Obviously, you need good EQ and being able to read a room and have good empathy to be able to like command good leadership, and then having that accumulate social capital. The issue with that is low agreeableness people tend to do better in, again, social economical outcomes, but they, again, because of the low agreeableness, they tend to rank lower in empathy. Now, there's a way to fight that. There are two different kinds of empathy. One is called emotional empathy. Second is called cognitive empathy. Now, emotional empathy is like when you see someone in the eye and the other person start to cry, you don't know why this person is very, very sad, but you feel this sadness, right? You resonate, you have this empathy. It's like, and you can cry with this person, even without knowing exactly why. That's emotional empathy. That's your mirror neuron being able to react to someone else's emotion very, very directly. Now, people with low agreeableness may not have that. Then you have to actually augment yourself with something called cognitive empathy. Basically, simulate yourself, put yourself in that person's shoes, like really, and then think about all the factors that are affecting that person. Like if I were in this situation with this amount of information, with this relationship, with this amount of work, in this like personal context too. So really understanding this person as a whole, then you can actually simulate and then be able to understand, not like have emotional empathy, but be able to understand and actually build cognitive empathy with the person. Then actually now you can actually have this empathy and be able to influence the person. This is a lot more cost inefficient way to build empathy. But the benefit is that because you understood and you consider so many factors, once you make that as a part of your muscle memory, then it becomes easier every single time to have this like more accurate form of empathy. And then two is like, even the people with very low empathy, once they experience it and once you simulate it, you feel like you kind of experienced it, then you can actually have a more sustainable, scalable empathy. I'm not saying this one is better than the other. I'm just saying like, if you don't have emotional empathy, there's a path to building empathy. And then I think it's really, really crucial to have that as a leader. It's like, for instance, when I was single, I never understood, why married people would spend time taking care of kids. Like, hey, that's your personal life. Don't bring your personal life to work. Just get shit done, right? But once they have kids, I'm like, holy shit, like half of the population of the world go through this thing. And it's like, it's so costly, so painful. And a lot of work, there's a lot of happiness comes with it. But once you experience it, like you kind of have this like deep empathy towards the experience they're going through. So I guess even people with low variableness like me can still build an empathy through a lot of cognitive empathy exercise, as well as actually experiencing things.
What are a few practices you've implemented so you're cognizant of this and you have to pause, right, and stop and think? And it's like training anything. It doesn't seem easy by the sounds of it.
Here's a brain hack. So brain is a parallel machine, right? We are terrible, our brain is terrible at understanding causations. Like, there's a famous exercise. If you're happy, people smile. Or if you see something funny, people smile. But if you actually smile, brain think you're seeing or having happiness. So, right, then your endorphins start to come out. I don't know if it's been repeated through tests. But basically, what I do was start by saying, hey, I agree with you, or something like it makes sense. So basically start by saying, I hear you, I understand you, I think it makes sense, it's fair. You don't necessarily have to like agree technically. Then what happens is like your brain will find cues, reasons to agree with this person. Your brain will start to rationalize this person's perspective. So actually you're kind of tricking your brain to build like this artificial empathy with this person. And then your brain is pretty smart. It'll figure out a way to rationalize this person's perspective. That by start saying that, positioning yourself. So visually imagine yourself not sitting across someone else, across the table, but imagine yourself sitting next to a person and looking at the same direction, kind of like using those like tactics that your brain will find ways to like justify and have empathy with the person. And then ask them, okay, I guess I'm by myself, but ask them, what are the things they are considering? What are the things they're hearing, listening, asking for facts? And then it's then your brain will kind of do the rest of the work to really build that empathy. But again, it takes a lot of practice and exercise. But over time, it kind of works out. A lot of these frameworks obviously are not something that I invented, right? There are books out there, there are great classes or schools that teach these kind of concepts. But ultimately, I think one of the most helpful thing is actually writing your own organization's onboarding doc and see if all of your philosophy and frameworks actually connect. Because sometimes people have these like different ideas that may contradict each other. But once you start writing this out as an onboarding material, then you feel like almost like creating a presentation. Then you have to make sure that all your frameworks to fall into this bigger framework of philosophy and your view on people and culture. Then it will start to make sense. Then you can kind of weed out, okay, what's authentic to me versus like what's good idea, but probably not authentic to myself or does not fit in with the rest of the organization's like values and culture. So an actual exercise that pretty much all founder CEOs should try doing is defining your core values and creating an onboarding doc. Then you can really kind of like crystallize your thoughts and I guess your leadership approach.
Definitely a good question here is, how do you deal with empowering your teams to be more autonomous, and how do you handle your personal desire to maintain a high level of standard? And you talked a little bit about this, having that cognitive empathy and seeing things from another lens, and also letting go. But how do you balance that, autonomy and high standard?
This is where you have to be really pick a lane and be consistent. So I talked about this with a good friend of mine who built many, many wonderful unicorns in the past. Like once you pick a lane, you got to stick with it and be very, very consistent when it comes to core values and culture. Because like people change, right? Your belief may change over time. You may read a book, you may meet a person, your value system may change over time. But you want to understand what's not going to change in the next 10 years, at least within the organization, and really, really stick to it. And then to actually get back to your question, I have this like gap between my bar and standards, what I expect from people, what I think is a great work, versus how patient I can be. Because like I'd be contradicting myself. It's like I don't believe in people who are up and comers, who haven't proven themselves yet. And if I don't bet on these people, I'm actually contradicting myself, because like people bet on me before I had any startup experience, right? Investors bet on me when I was doing my first startup. People joined my company when I didn't have anything under my resume to prove that I was a founder CEO. So as a professional CEO, you can kind of come in. It's like, hey, here's my bar. Anyone that doesn't meet the bar, we're gonna like lay off people. I cannot do that because as a founder CEO, I gotta bet on people who are up and comers, who has a potential, who has a right attitude, etc. So you have to like build this consistency. So where I'm struggling, but also believe in is we got to keep the bar high, but give people the patience and trust so that they can actually build up to that, right? Meet that and hopefully grow over that expectation. Now, this is a real trade-off because like sometimes as an organization, you cannot bet on people for multiple years. These people need to step up every quarter or two quarters if you're in a fast-growing organization. So ultimately, it comes down to the growth rate of the organization. If your organization is growing really fast, you cannot give a lot of time to people because either they meet up to the growth rate, or you have to hire someone above that, like layer person, so that the organization can have the capacity to continue to grow with the right set of leadership. If your organization is growing not as fast, then people can have enough time to grow themselves into the role. So it really comes down to the level of the growth rate of the organization. Because like as an IC, it can still give a lot of leeway for people to kind of learn and grow. But if you're like a manager, especially like a senior management, like whatever your bottleneck is, personal like leadership bottleneck is, the rest of the organization suffers because of leaders' capabilities or capacity. So it comes down to the growth rate of the organization, and then how much of a gap are you willing to give in terms of the gap between your standard expectations versus where they are today. And then that gap you can compensate with time, coaching, surrounding themselves with other people, etc. But I guess the primary constraint there is the growth rate of the organization, or what the organization needs.
When with executive hiring and leaders, right? You said it right. You can't give them a lot of time because it could slow down the whole organization. What is the ideal time frame, and what are some leading indicators that you use to figure out if this executive is going to work out or not?
Yeah, kind of goes back to network science or complexity science. Like any there's a bunch of articles on it. So basically, like a ideal rate between a manager to IC levels like 1 to 5 to 1 to 7, right? If you get to 1 to 10, may work out for temporarily, but people start to like tap out because you literally cannot have enough time to do one-on-ones with 10 people plus. Unless you work with them for like decade plus, so you don't really need like weekly one-on-ones. So basically, you have this like ratio between manager to ICs and cascading layers of that throughout the organization. Now, do the leader, especially based on the growth rate, if your organization is like doubling every year or tripling every year, then you kind of can project how many headcounts this person will need to manage. Then you have to figure out, can this person elevate to the next abstraction layer in the next 6 to 12 months? Because when somebody becomes promoted or you hire someone from outside, they need 3 to 6 months. 3 months at a minimum to 6 months to really ramp up, quote unquote, right? And someone who's never really managed a scale usually takes a little bit more time, maybe a year. So even within the fast-growing organization, some department may not grow as fast, like let's say call it finance, right? Versus sales, headcount's going to grow very, very fast because sales is a low leverage organization where the output is scaled linearly with the headcount. So based on the scale of the organization in the next 12 to 24 months, of the department, you can kind of project like how fast this leader needs to scale to the next level of abstraction layer. Usually, if you're in a fast-growing organization, you can't really have more than 6 to 12 months. So that's why people say like you got to fire yourself every 6 to 12 months. You got to like redefine your job description every 6 to 12 months in a fast-growing organization. It's all, if you do the bottom-up analysis of that, usually comes out to that, right? So you can't really give more than 6 to 12 months. In the early days, before product market fit, you can give people like 2 to 3 years. Because like you don't know what's going to happen, right? You may actually completely pivot your business, like our case, from consumer to B2B API. So you need all those people's loyalty and perseverance. But once you're in hyper growth, like hyper scaling mode, honestly, you can't really give people more than 6 to 12 months.
What are some traits you look for, or some key sort of elements that this person is going to level up to the next abstraction layer and next abstraction layer? What are some key traits someone needs to have?
Yeah. So again, it's ability to navigate. So sometimes people go up the abstraction layer too quickly. So they start losing the grip of what's happening in the ground, or where the rubber meets the road, right? So they kind of on the navigating on the clouds. They don't have their feet on the ground. Versus some people, actually a lot of capable people, have a hard time letting go of the things they used to do. I see this more often with capable people. It's like, because they know what great work looks like. They have a high standards. They know exact details of how things need to be done. So they have a hard time letting go of people, trusting people, and then giving people enough time and room to figure out things on their own. Because all great work outcome may look similar, but how you get there may look different based on the personality profile. If you're like, to use Myers-Briggs, if you're ESTJ versus like ENFP, how you approach work is going to look very, very different. But because people have done their work, they know exact gory detail of what excellence look like. These people might come in and start to micromanage. So you got to really coach them to let go of people, but also hire great talent so they can actually trust and delegate. And this is actually, I see this happen more, or people struggle more with talented people. It's like letting go of things. That's why I keep emphasizing things like you have to learn to unlearn your greatness. And because what got you there won't get you there, right? What got you here won't
Definitely.
get you there. So
definitely. A lot of what you talked today is fascinating because a lot of focus on people and team and growth of those people. What are the key steps to successful hiring or bringing on people, motivating them to join, you found?
So let me actually answer in a slightly different way. I learned about this term called tweener. I'm not a sports fan, so I don't know. But I heard it like in basketball, there are tweeners. We're kind of like good at dribbling, good at offense, good at defense, a little bit, but not like spectacular in one way. Yeah. And which is like great if you're playing basketball and you're like neighbors, right? It's a heck of a lot of fun. But if you're trying to build an all-star team, you can't have like 5 tweeners on your team. You need one who's excellent at being a center, right? You need to find people who have clear, zone of genius or clear strength. And you need to augment that person's shortcomings or room for improvements with other people's strength. That's how you build an all-star team. You need Michael Jordan's, well, I guess Michael Jordan's like good at pretty much everything, but you need like the Scottie Pippins that you can kind of tell my generation by the players that I name drop. But anyway, so you're looking for people's clear strength, and then make sure you are augmenting the person's like blind spots and weaknesses with other people. So if you look at our current executive team, pretty much everyone, maybe except for one person, have 5 to 10, maybe sometimes 20 years of more experience than I do. Because like, I don't know what great sales look like. I don't know what great marketing looks like. I don't know what great finance look like. So you got to surround yourself, like it's a cliche, but be able to attract those people who have a clear strength that you can learn from, that you can inspire from, and then hopefully replicate throughout the rest of the organization. So focus on strength, and then don't try to like hire people that kind of like you. Optimize towards value alignment, then focus on strength. They're clearly better than you.
Definitely. Now, as you go from sort of post-seed product market fit to Series B, how do you build out the team? In which order do you recommend hiring people? Which is really key, right? You don't want to bring the right leaders at the wrong time.
So I use this framework called 2PM, people, product, market, money. And it's a
people,
virtual cycle.
Product, market, money.
So 2 Ps and 2 Ms. So 2PM, right? So you got to hire the right set of people to build the right product, and you got to go to market with the right marketing sales. And with that, you get enough revenue or money, right? You either generate revenue or profit, or you raise money to be able to hire more people to create even better products. So it's a flywheel. And every time you have to think about your uniqueness as a business and what in the flywheel, what are your primary constraints, right? So let's say you're a great product genius, but you have no idea how to go to market with it. Then obviously the people you need to hire is a marketing leader. If you're more in the SMB bottom up, product-led growth, then you probably need to focus on marketing first. But if you're more like mid-market to enterprise, sales-led, you got to probably hire a VP of sales. Obviously, they have to go hand in hand. So your primary constraints become the go-to-market side, the market. But if you're like, okay, right now I'm struggling with fundraising, I don't know how to manage money, I feel like we're burning too much capital, but I have no idea how to measure it, then you probably need someone in finance, like CFO or like VP of finance. So it's really thinking about what are your primary constraints and what is your zone of genius, what is your executive team's entire strengths, and what are the blind spots that we lack. Then we hire through that, right? You're as a founder, you might be great at sales, but you may not be the great product.
As you look back at your career, what do you wish you did more of, and what do you wish you did less of?
This is really a hard question, because I think for whatever serendipitous reasons, we by luck, sheer luck, a lot of things went right. But I think ultimately it comes down to people. If you have the right, great set of great talent, and if you have more great leadership early on, you can probably grow faster and make a lot more right decisions. I think or as I guess my personality wise, I focus a little bit too much on known people, like people that I know, continue betting on them, which I think from humanity perspective is great. But from organization perspective, I think we could have probably saved a lot of time just looking for great talent more aggressively. So what do I wish I did more of was like continue to connect with great talent out there, being more aggressive with finding the next level leadership. Thankfully, all of our co-founders is here. All of our first generation, even second generation management team is still here at SendBird. But being able to find great talent early on and just continue to leverage those leadership is something that I wish we had done more frequently. A little bit less of was as a early stage founder, CEO. I think we tend to obsess over the wrong things, like, oh, we got to move this pixel to the right. We got to make the screen a little bit less, bright, etc. And like we get constant battles of every single minute details of the business. Ultimately, before you reach product market fit, don't obsess over wrong things, right? When I was doing my first startup, we built a web service, a social network back then. And then I imagined, oh, what if our traffic, comes in so quickly? So we did like database charting. Also, because it's consumer business, I'm going to build an advertising platform, and then also bidding system, auctioning. So I actually end up building the entire auction, like advertising auction system, before we even like release a product, which is like now hindsight is like totally dumb and like you should never do it. But we ended up over-engineering, overbuilding, and obsessing over wrong things, constant fight with my co-founders over minute details that never matter to customers. So actually go talk to customers a lot more often and early on, and don't obsess over minute details. That only leads to ton of resentment that actually don't matter to customers.
What's the one piece of unconventional wisdom that founders typically ignore but shouldn't?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of touchy-feely good things that we like to hear on Twitter or blog posts, like, oh, just be yourself or follow your passion, like work-life balance is great. It's like all of these things I think are great to hear, and you should absolutely tell to everyone as a founder, CEO, or as a CEO. But in reality, like being yourself is kind of not always works out. Let's say you have a terrible, anger management issues. Like, don't be yourself, right? Augment yourself with other people who can kind of help you elevate your leadership. So I think being authentic to yourself is important, but just like blindly thinking you're the greatest person ever and just keep being yourself will solve all the problems, I think is a terrible advice. Two is like following your passion also is tend to be a terrible advice. Because ultimately, when you're trying to build a business, you have to follow passion as long as it creates customer value. If your passion is not creating customer value, but only your pleasure, then do it as a hobby. A lot of people kind of mistake like your passion, if you do great with your passion, will create ultimate customer value. It's like not always true. So just because it sounds good doesn't mean it's true, right? So and so following your passion is not the goal. I mean, it could be a goal of your personal life, but your business goal should be focused on customer value. And the last, like work-life balance. I mean, I could be more opinionated here. I'm generally a believer of high conscientiousness, and because the Big Five Factor model, they measure conscientiousness. I rank pretty high in conscientiousness. So maybe because of that, I'm just born this way. But I've rarely yet to see any great businesses that endures over a decade plus that were built with sheer luck or some, walk in the park. Maybe you get luck in once in a while. So actually, a lot of studies were done on this. The highest correlate two factors that correlates to high social economic outcomes that are highest correlation are two things. One is intelligence, obviously, and then two is conscientiousness. Those two things had the highest correlation to social economical outcomes. I'm not like arguing with my personal beliefs, like what the studies show. So what I'm saying is like, hey, if you work hard and if you, again, zone of genius, right? What you're good at, so you're smart in that area. If you work hard at it, then luck tends to find you. So don't plan I think our board member said this, don't plan on cascade of miracles. Don't assume luck will find you. If you keep working hard in the area that you're actually good at, then, once in a while, luck will find you, right? So I kind of believe that that's why you got to do, especially before product market fit. After product market fit, once you have great leaders, then you can have leverage, go on vacations, etc. But before product market fit, it's so hard.
I've done more than 300 sessions here over the last few years, and probably this is the only session I've done where there's so many frameworks that the speaker has talked about, and I've learned a ton. I've taken some notes, and I'm sure our audience as well, and a lot to think about here. You seem like you have it all figured out from the outside, right? Through, of course, hardships, multiple startups, and so on. Today, as you become this platform company and become a multi-billion-dollar company, what is your biggest fear as a leader, and how do you navigate it?
Right. So one of my tendencies, I'm a paranoid, right? I worry about all the things all the time. And that's a trait of an engineer, right? So what happens if there's an outage? But ultimately, if you sum it up, right? I think, was it maybe Jack Welch or Bill Gates, one of those folks said it, ultimately the business matters in these three ways. One is customer happiness, two is employee happiness, but I like to use the word engagement better. So customer happiness, employee engagement, cash flow. If you don't run out of money, if the employees are engaged, if the customer's happy, you'll build a great business, right? Then what is the reverse of that? If the customers are unhappy because your product sucks or your service sucks, if your employees are not engaged because they're terrible culture or terrible leadership, if you run out of money, that worries me a lot. So you don't want to wait until any of those things become a problem. You want to get ahead of the problem. That's why you need to hire drivers who can, and at each cascading layer of organization, they can always get ahead of the problem, not be reactive, but be able to proactive and design and architect a lot of those things. So yeah, customer happiness, employee engagement, and cash flow. Inverse of that is something that I worry about terribly.
And you watch them, and you have leading indicators. What are some top KPIs you recommend measuring as other founders and leaders think about this?
I mean, these are obvious things, right? Customer metrics, you can use, you can measure things like customer usage, adoption, product usage, NPSs, CSAT scores, but you have to look at holistically. Because like once you start measuring one thing, like in the Convergence framework, everything optimizes towards that. So whenever you're measuring one metric, you always need a sanity checker. Let's say you're growing fast, right? Your sales numbers are going up. But if you only measure that, a lot of salespeople will just end up giving a ton of discounts, right? So you also want to measure gross margin to make sure that your revenue is also a healthy one in metrics, right? When you're trying to gain weight, you also measure weight, but also like body BMI or your fat percentage, right? So you want to always want to like measure this sanity checkers, like employee engagement too. Like we do employee engagement surveys. We measured a couple of different factors. As an executive team, we take it very, very seriously. We had like 2 weeks long sessions on like what are the next action items to improve them. So you do measure employee engagement surveys, and don't use one snapshot. Always measure the vectors, right? You measure series, and then you see what changes. That actually is more informative than measuring snapshot, because that can be influenced by a recent fundraise or big customer deal. Like they can influence a lot of things. But if you measure a lot of different dimensions over time, then see what changes, then you can really start to understand what is the DNA of your organization. So I think measuring that would be important. And cash flow, obviously, like burn rate, runway, AR per FTE, et cetera. So there are a lot of good playbooks on what to measure, but I think those are like things that we implemented at SendBird.
Through your journey as an entrepreneur, are there any books that you relied on or anything that you recommend people read?
Yeah, so thankfully, I still kind of read. I obviously read a lot, but I think ultimately it comes down to understanding what doesn't change, right? I read a lot of science-related books, physics, brain, psychology, because what's interesting about people is like people fundamentally don't change a lot, because it took us millions and millions of years of evolution to get to where we are today. 1,000 years of technology and culture is not going to change who we are as a fundamental human being. So reading things like cognitive science, neuroscience, liver on the brain side of things, I think was very, very helpful. Reading anything around like complexity science really helps you understand around like behavioral economics, organizational theories. I think those are helpful. Actually, like I get a ton of lessons from biology and physics on how to build a scalable organization or enduring organizations. And then also like good books like on startups, like High Growth Handbook by Elliot Gill. There are good books on startups these days. I could recommend a couple of books on sales, like Predictable Revenue, Sales Acceleration Formula. I think I mentioned that before. Challenger Sales, etc. Yeah, but I typically go back to science books.
Definitely, and we've had all those authors. We've had all those authors speak as well, like Sales Acceleration, nice. Predictable Revenue, Elad Gill, etc. Where can our audience follow you? What social channels are you active on?
So I'm not too active. I do have a Twitter account, Doshkim, DOSHKIM. I do have Facebook, Instagram. Instagram is like 4 letters, DOSH. But I do have a YouTube channel, but that's in Korean. I'm not super active on social. I try to, but I really don't get it. If you're a founder CEO, how can you be super active on social media unless you build like a publicly traded company where all the leadership is like working like a well-oiled machine? But I try to keep in touch or keep in tap of what's happening out in the market through social media.
You have a great task ahead, building a multi-billion-dollar company and caring for your people. So you have a busy job as it is. Being active on social is a job on its own. Thank you so much for imparting your knowledge. Some of the feedback here has been, it's one of the best sessions thus far. So John, thank you so much. Wishing you great success. Have a wonderful weekend coming up.
Yeah, thanks so much. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.
I need some traction. You need some traction.